Thank you. It's truly an honor to be back home in Jamaica. And of course, Nigel has alluded to some of my family history and so forth. I wanted to first, just even before I get to the standpoint of flying around the world and all the challenges, that encompass, I first want to talk to you all about the challenges and what it took to get there. Well, before I got into aviation and flying, my family moved up to Miami, and I was only 6 years of age at the time, and continued through school. And during high school in America, I turned out to be a really good football athlete, American football. I played fullback and linebacker. I was at the time 197 pounds, 3% body fat. Fell away from that, and I ran a 4.3 in the 40. I was a really sharp athlete, had a number of full scholarship offers in front of me. So going through this whole process of playing football and having football on my mind, I said to myself, I'm just interested in wanting to do more in life. And here I am. My parents had a small Bible bookstore in Miami, and it was during the off season, and I was just helping out. And this guy walks up to me, who you see in the second picture here. His name is Captain Gary Robinson, who is also Jamaican. And he walked up to me out of the blue and said to me, "Hey, son, have you ever thought about becoming a pilot?" I looked at him crazy and I asked him two questions. The first question I asked him was, how smart do you have to be to become a pilot? The second question I asked him, being the young person that I asked him how much money does he make? After he answered the second question, I took an interest in aviation, and that's where it all began. Next thing you know, we have this thing in Miami called signing day, where we basically decide which college team will continue to play football for. And I said to myself on that day that I wasn't going to sign with anyone. I turned down a number of full scholarships to continue playing football and said that I wanted to pursue a career in aviation. Honestly felt like the dumbest decision I've ever made in my life. Why? Because the guys I played football with couldn't understand what was wrong with me. My coaches, they couldn't believe I turned down scholarships to the top scouts and recruits. And all the girls in high school who used to wear my jersey number on their shirts and so forth no longer wanted to talk to me. Probably the hardest part of the process. And here I am saying that I no longer want to play football. I want to become a pilot. But I had a tremendous issue. I was poor. How was I going to be able to afford flight lessons? Your first flight license costs around $6,000. US. Yeah, it makes a big difference. So I said to myself, I'm willing to do whatever it takes in order to achieve my dreams. I did odd jobs, worked at grocery stores, cleaned pools, whatever it took in order to raise enough money for me to pay for my first license, which I received at the age of 19. After receiving my license, I said to myself, I wanted to do more. I received a full scholarship to Florida Memorial University, where I continued my studies in aeronautical science, and in addition to that, continued my flight training. And during that time of receiving the scholarships and so forth, I just kept hammering myself, I want to do more, I want to do more. And I couldn't figure it out. Then I realized immediately that I wanted to fly around the world. First I said, well, what if I flew around Florida? Like, oh, that's too boring. Then I said, what if I flew around the United States? Oh, not there yet. Then I said, I wanted to fly around the world. Sounds good to say. Can you believe for 2.5 years, it took 2.5 years for me to get my first sponsor to say yes? Some of the earlier speakers spoke about resilience and persistence and hard work. 2.5 years. I want to share with you a story since, I've dedicated my life to science, technology, engineering, and math. It's something that we call STEM. And I want you guys to take a look at this interesting formula you see behind me. What does a sub-sandwich, deodorant, and an engine have to do with a $650,000 aircraft? Well, I took it upon myself to say, okay, the first thing you need to fly around the world is an airplane, right? I said, well, if I need an airplane to fly around the world, I reached out to people and manufacturers and said, well, can I borrow a plane? Can I rent a plane? They said, there's no way you're going to be able to do that. We don't think you have the experience. We don't think you have the expertise. We don't think you have the funding. All of these reasons of why I could not fly around the world. So the same way you look at a car and you see an emblem on a car doesn't mean that manufacturer made all the parts. There's different equipment manufacturers. And the same thing applies to aviation. So I took it upon myself to drive all the way from Miami to Mobile, Alabama, with only enough money to rent a car, put gas in it, buy 12-inch subs, this is where the sub come in, 6 inches for the first half of the day, 6 inches for the second half of the day. I kid you not. Didn't get too much oil and vinegar because I didn't want it to be soggy. Brought plenty of deodorant with me because I couldn't afford to stay in a hotel or a motel, and I slept in the car. And I showed up at one of the largest general aviation engine manufacturers in the world, dressed in a nice suit, and I said, hi, my name is Barrington Irving. I want to see if your engine is good enough for my airplane. I didn't even own an airplane. But they fell for it. They let me in. They were showing, giving me the tour of how the engine was made and the warranties and so forth and so forth. Then I took it a step further. Talk about being an entrepreneur. I took it a step further, and I made sure I called the CEO by his first name. I said, is Brian here? They said, which Brian? Yeah, Brian who runs the company. They said, you know Brian? I said, yeah, I met Brian. I met Brian a couple times at air shows and conventions and so forth. Never met the guy before in my life. So Brian walks in, immediately realizes I tricked his whole staff. He said to me, you got 5 minutes, shoot. And once I had the opportunity to speak to the decision maker, I was honest with him. I told him who I was, where I was from, what I was trying to do, and exactly why I was trying to do it. Brian told me, thank you for coming, and I drove all the way back home to Miami with plenty of deodorant. Got a phone call a couple weeks later, and it was Brian. And Brian said, you know what, if you had the guts to find me, I believe you can find yourself around the world. We never sponsor engines for anything like this, but I'm willing to give you an engine worth $83,000 right there on the spot. So after I received the engine, I then went after the cockpit system, that was $70,000. Even the seats in the plane, that was $30,000. You name it, I went after it. I was able to finance the aircraft, cut the cost of it in half, and at the age of 21, flew out of Oregon with a $650,000 airplane. Now, let's look at another formula. What does $30, can't swim sign, and no radar equal the world? Well, let's fast forward a little bit as I had to train myself. Of course, I spoke with a lot of pilots and professionals, but the actual preparation and flight training, I had to do that on my own because people felt it was too dangerous, and I didn't fault them. The youngest person to fly around the world before me was 37 years of age, and I was able to do it at 23. The highest mountain we have in Florida is what? Why don't you laugh? The highest mountain we have in Florida is the back of an alligator. So I took it upon myself to go out in Colorado and Washington State and train and fly in mountains and, cross over oceans and so forth. And fast forward to March 23rd, 2007, which was the funniest day ever to me because a lot of people didn't know this. Here I was in Miami announcing that I'm preparing to fly around the world. I'm interviewing live with CNN. I'm interviewing live with the Today Show. I'm doing all these interviews and so forth. There are about 5,000 people at the airport. I'm reading banners and signs that say, go, Barrington, go, seeing all the Jamaican flags and everything. You know how much money I had in my pocket? I only had 3 $10 bills in my pocket. I didn't even have enough money to fill up my plane with gas when I reached my first stop. But no one knew this. In addition to that, I couldn't swim at that time. In addition to that, my aircraft had no weather radar because I couldn't get anyone to sponsor it and I couldn't afford it. In addition to that, my aircraft had no de-icing. And I know back to the swimming part, some of you guys are saying, well, you're crazy. How is it, you just leave and you don't know how to swim? Well, I didn't have any support plane following me or anything. And I said, well, if I crash in the ocean, where am I going to go? Where am I going to swim to in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean? Didn't make much of a difference if you knew how to swim or not. So I flew around the world. It was certainly a grueling task. It took me 97 days to accomplish. Imagine sitting the way you're sitting for 12 and a half hours. It was a small single-engine airplane. It's not as if you can get up and say, oh, you're now free to move about the cabin. None of that. And we noticed a number of things. One thing that really impacted me was that we had over 300,000 students directly blogging and tracking back and forth with me as I was flying around the world. And this just grew from out of nowhere. Back to the $30 that you're wondering, well, how was I able to get enough money to continue flying around the world? By the time I left Miami and reached my first stop in Cleveland, Ohio, where NASA had 87,000 of their SEMA students tracking my flight, Miami fundraised close to $100,000. And the further I kept on going, the more money was raised. The total project cost $1.2 million US to achieve. But see, I learned a valuable lesson because I looked the part from the standpoint of I had my flight suit on, I had the determination, and when I left out of Miami, people began to believe that, this young kid could actually fly around the world. Let's talk about some of the challenges and my experience of flying around the world. Well, when I flew around the world, I encountered something that scared me really bad and was not on my checklist. I was flying over Saudi Arabia at 17,000 feet, went from a clear day to next thing you know, I'm stuck in a sandstorm. The sand off the ground was all around me at 17,000 feet in the air. I went from seeing the sun to seeing shimmers of the sun. Couldn't see anything. Planes are not made to fly through sandstorms. And by the grace of God, what saved me was that the sand did not get to the turbochargers in the engine, which would have forced me to crash in the middle of the desert. And I know some of you are saying, well, why couldn't you just land in an airport, wait for the storm to pass by, and then continue? Well, when you're flying over places like Saudi Arabia, you can't just show up somewhere and say, hey, I'm going to wait till the storm passes over. Now, let's look at my experience. There have been over 200 individuals who've flown small planes around the world, whether twin-engine or single-engine airplanes. They've had at least 10,000 flight hours. When I flew around the world, I only had 600 flight hours when I flew around the world. You think about flying for 12 hours at a time, airlines mandate that you have 2 crews with you. There was only a crew of 1. It was a solo flight. Youngest person before me was 37 years of age. I did it at 23. And one of the most interesting things I found was the experience of having pilots who radioed down to me, back and forth saying, well, you're flying over this particular portion. We don't think you're going to make it. What's your parents' name? What's their phone number? And I'm saying to myself, thanks for the encouragement, guys. So after flying around the world, I started Experience Aviation. It's a nonprofit organization focused on utilizing aviation and aerospace to help kids build their science and math skills. And we've had tremendous success with that. It's an organization based in Miami where we now have 2 locations. We also offer services in Dallas, and we're starting to expand. And of course, you saw more with our Build and Soar project, where I did an experiment. I took 60 kids from failing schools, had them build an aircraft in 10 weeks, and I put my life on the line, as you saw, and flew the aircraft and was able to talk about it. We work with a multitude of kids, of course, kids from Jamaica and various parts of the islands, from Bahamas to Haiti, St. Lucia, all over. And I had tremendous success doing that. But I said I wanted to do more. I wanted to reach beyond facilities of where I was located. So I started doing some research about a year and a half ago, and I realized something really startling, which is actually a trend that's occurring. In the USA, out of 4.2 million students, only 2.9 of them graduate. All right, we know that stat. But what's interesting is when you look at how many of those students actually pursue a career in science, technology, engineering, and math and obtain a degree. Only 277,550 students obtain a degree in science, technology, engineering, and math. What's got our kids' attention? Well, we all know it's technology. Let's look at some interesting numbers. 46 million, the number of children between ages 5 and 17 who are currently gamers, play video games. How much time, the average time a student takes in dedicating their lives to media? 10 hours per day. Now let's look at something that really shocked me. 1.6% is the amount education invests in technology in the United States, compared to 67% the private sector invests in technology. We're wondering why our kids aren't learning as well. And then I know we have some adults in the audience, and you're saying, well, we don't play games. We don't have time for games. Really? 1.3 billion adults are gamers. Well, you guys might say, well, how am I playing games? Any of you guys part of any rewards programs? That's a game. Now, I said to myself, I want to do more. I want to reach beyond. How do I give 1 million kids the world? And at the same time, how do we impact academic performance in math and science? So I locked myself in a dungeon, other than making kids. I locked myself in a dungeon. And I said to myself, I have to figure this out. And here's what I'm working on next. I'm proud to announce it here in Jamaica. I'm just recently signed a deal with the third largest aircraft manufacturer in the world, Embraer, a company based in Brazil. And in signing this agreement, we're preparing to transform a corporate jet aircraft into a flying classroom, teaching kids anywhere in the world from 40,000 feet. As I'm flying, I'm broadcasting math and science, I'm broadcasting experiments. I have the ability to call classrooms from 40,000 feet in the air, talk to classrooms, host web forums, and so forth. But I decided that I still wanted to do more. Because, yes, flying around the world and teaching kids from the air is an amazing thing. By the way, I am planning to fly around the world again in this aircraft as I explore math and science in different regions of the world. But in addition to that, we wanted to provide an experience for kids where you leverage their attention with games and tie that back into a way for them to learn math and science. Well, how are you going to do that? I looked at my own life experience, and my success started when I was introduced to aviation. I couldn't afford to fly. It started with a game called Microsoft Flight Simulator, one of the most successful games ever invented as it relates to having a learning gain that helps an individual whether pursue a career or learn certain concepts. So I said to myself, we're going to develop games focused on different real-world scenarios where students actually have to apply math and science skills in order to solve those problems. Where you make math and science relevant, where you make math and science important, and you show and you give students the power to solve real-world problems using math and science. Well, you guys are saying, well, what do you mean by that? I'll give you an example. Currently, right now, we've partnered with NASA, Teach for America. We've also partnered with the United Nations Foundation. We've partnered with a number of others, University of Central Florida, where right now we're developing a game. And one of the games we want to develop is Mission Haiti, where we put students in a real-world environment, recreate the devastation which occurred in Haiti, but tie that into a game where kids have to dispatch the right aircraft in order to solve or deliver medical supplies, rescue individuals, and so forth. It's not like you say, okay, I'm going to dispatch this kind of plane and so forth in order to do so. No way. You have to look at the weight and balance of the load you're carrying, the runway, if there's a runway, what does the individual need to be rescued, on and on and on, and you're using math and science the entire time in order to solve that problem. I say that to say this. I've had tremendous success with my first global flight around the world. And yes, that was a great accomplishment. It's great to be in Guinness World Records. It's great to receive all these accolades and awards. But globally, we struggle with a major issue as it relates to young people pursuing certain careers that are math and science related and providing them not only the exposure, not only the access, but being able to motivate them to pursue these careers. I'll share an experience with you all. I know you guys are still doing the math problem of how do I have a 5-month-old twin daughters and a 15-month-old son. Well, that started because my wife delivered our twin girls prematurely at 6 months. And I'll never forget the feeling when, we had to go in the emergency room, they had to pull the twins. And I'll never forget for the next 10 weeks they were in the hospital, how helpless I felt. I wanted to do anything for them. I wanted to give them the world. And I realized I can do anything for them. But you know what? As I looked at the nurses and so forth who were helping and the doctors, they were able to do their part to help my children survive. And something really hit me on that day. And I realized that although not one single individual can give a child a world, together we can give them a world of opportunities. Thank you all for having me.